Let's get started. We're right at 7. And first, the speakers are not allowed to have PowerPoint, but I am. There's just a little bit of blurb on the MIT Enterprise Forum. So, as you know, you're here with the software SIG, but the MIT Enterprise Forum does many, many different kinds of programs. We're here at the bottom right, software special interest group, and we do one of these programs every month. But there are also other programs that the MIT Enterprise Forum does. Concept and startup clinics for folks that are just getting started with creating a company. There are also some fairly infrequent, about quarterly CEO series, and also we've had some very, very interesting innovation series. So there are, of course, other SIGs as well, and I hope we have a great program today. Last time we had a mobile program as well, which was oversubscribed. I think today, due to the rain and all that, we'll have people coming in slowly but surely. Some of the upcoming events, not only this SIG, but RFID and other SIGs, but also the innovation series and all that. You can also go see all of this at the Enterprise Forum website. And of course, there are a lot of forum members, both technology companies and as well as others like David's company, lawyers, some investors, and so forth. As you can see, those are some of the sponsors. I think the format typically is that I'm going to introduce David Hausner here, who actually was one of the founders of the SIG. But he'll introduce the speakers. The speakers get 10 minutes each, and then we'll have Q&A. Just a reminder, we're recording everything, so if there's anything you do not want to say in a public forum, please don't, for the speakers, but also for the members in the audience. We typically go around and do just one line per person intro. I don't think we'll have time just because of the size of the audience, but I would like to ask one question of the audience members here. How many have launched or created a mobile app? Wow, okay. We may not even have time to go. Well, let's do that. Could you just tell us your name and what the mobile app does? Let's start over there.
Video morphing app takes has a set of faces on it, and they change. It's a little game to figure out which face the garment.
Great. And also the platform. Only iPhone?
iPhone.
Only
yeah.
Another back there?
It's for a museum. It just highlights a recent exhibit, and it's for the iPhone.
We've done over 15 apps, core apps for Android tablets.
Got it. There were a few other hands in the middle. Yes, sir.
Location-based photo sharing app for voting things that you like nearby.
Got it. Right here. Yeah. No. Yes, sir.
I hope to do one.
Yeah, Clipper Inc. We have a back-end infrastructure that was supporting these type of phone
Great.
for video editing and social. I'm using it right now.
Good. Thank you. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Our app is actually the evil app. It's around digital rights management, so it's actually to protect the high-value content going through an Android or an iOS device.
Got it. Another set of questions. How many people are here who are thinking about starting a company, project, whatever? Wow. It's a good turnout. How many already have companies going and are thinking about branching out into mobile? Cool. Investors? None. I guess it's a good record? No? Okay. And professional services folks? All right, good. All right, with that, David, it's all yours. And please stay after the, stay.
Stay afterwards and
Afterwards,
talk to the
yes.
speakers.
We close at what time?
We're going to try to, if the questions keep going, we will shut things down at 8:45 if the questions stop. In our experiences, in case any of you are going to run groups yourselves at some point, is when we break 40, the questions actually we tend to get fewer questions because we lose what we think is sort of the fireside chat atmosphere of these presentations. So we'll go until the questions stop, and certainly by 8:45. And if the speakers or panelists are nice enough to stay around, so be it. Come up and talk to them, or equally, if not more importantly, talk to each other.
Great.
So thanks. This is the ninth, I think, season for this group. A few of us in the room do organization. The four of us up here do organization. Amy is from MIT Enterprise Forum itself, so she's our minder. So we'll try to keep on track here, not so much time-wise, but with respect to what we say about the forum. But the one thing that is important is this group can use volunteers. The folks who organize the folks who organize the software SIG, that's us, could always use help. Mike joined us last year. Sanjay joined us about 4 years ago. So if you're interested in helping organize in the future, give us a yell. Any of the three of us, or come back. Better yet, come back to more programs and see how this goes. And if it suits your fancy, that's great. We're unlike many other SIGs. We try to keep the numbers in here down to sort of 30 or 40 person level. We're not going for large programs, so that's often a differentiating factor for people who like to volunteer. That's it. Last month we had a discussion of starting an iPhone app business. In general, the discussions that we have had, that this SIG has supported over the years, have been from the entrepreneur's perspective, and we're on the one hand trying to stick with that. On the other hand, we realize that entrepreneurs, when it comes to iPhone apps, will often have a very good handle, if only from a manager's perspective, need to have a handle on what the technical side looks like. So when we do, so what we thought we would do this year, and we're going to continue in this session, is in addition to talking about a critical issue we think for all of you, or we're assuming for all of you, which is funding an iPhone app business, and more broadly a mobile app business. So that would be Android and the like that Chris will address. In addition to the funding side, we're going to try to, and this is the second program in this set of programs that we're attempting to do this on, we're going to try to delve a little into the technical side. So those of you who are, say, having offshore development done or using consultants to do development, when you hear from your developer that you've hired in, whether it's somewhere in China or whether it's in California, when they say, oh, it's going to cost $100,000 to get the software development kit, or some equivalent issue that Chris will raise today, you'll be able to say, you know, BS, I heard in the SIG and I saw it happen. No, it's not that hard. So we're going to try to give you a sense of the technical side here, in addition to the very critical sort of managerial or business CEO's perspective. That said, today's program is on from the technical side on starting a project, and from the business side on funding an iPhone company. We've got a really interesting perspective here. MacShane, whom at least a few in this room know, and I suspect more than a few, but a few in the room have actually worked with Nick on the business side, is I'll call him generally a funder. His bio is he's with Progress Partners, which I don't think we probably would call a venture capital group.
It's an investment bank, and then we have a sidecar investment fund called Progress Ventures.
Good. So he's essentially a funder, and I know folks who have worked with him, and it sounds like an investment part why he's here. So Nick will give a perspective of how he sees how he sees funding an iPhone business from a funder's perspective. On the other hand, Mark is now in his, I'll say third, I think I can fairly say at least third business. With a Motorola background at Motorola, he's in his third startup or small business, not that small, that's actually gotten funding. And so Mark can comment on Nick's comments. We'll give you a different perspective on Nick's comments. Finally, if the funding picture fails for all of you, or as an aside, Chris Deschenes, who is with, and I should say Mark is currently with Illume software, which was made famous a few years ago. I reached my pocket for my phone. Illume was famous for, and still is famous for, an app that allows you to block your phone from accessing from texting and asking email while you're driving.
Right.
I have Siri on my new phone, and I'm wondering whether that will put Illume out of business.
No, she doesn't like you though.
She doesn't. So that side, Chris Deschenes is from Nexus CADnexus. Chris is heavily involved, is at a startup now and is heavily involved in, among other things, in addition to program development, is heavily involved in getting funding, not from the likes of Nick, but rather from the government. So this was, I think, really unusual for this group and a treat in a way, which is to learn about the SBIR side, the SBIR side of funding, which I think all of us, many folks tend to shy away from. And I think Chris will be able to give us a sense whether that's realistic or not. That said, what I'd like to do is get a 10-minute intro comments from the three gentlemen up here. They're not going to try to read their bios back. If you want more on their bios, go to their LinkedIn pages. You can read a little of what we handed out here. But they're going to try to give you, I think, sort of war stories, their view of life from a sort of story perspective, and weave their backgrounds in. I think the easiest thing to do is start with Nick on the funding side. You can hold questions until all three of them have spoken, and after you have some discussion, we'll have Chris come back and talk on the technical side. We'll start the business side and start with Nick and go from there.
Well, thank you all for coming and finding parking and blazing through the rain of this evening, which is probably discouraging to many. I run a firm called Progress Partners. It's a 10-year-old investment bank based in Cambridge, one Broadway at Cambridge Innovation Center, which is a terrific place to be as a startup company and as a company that works with startup companies. I think there are 300 companies in the building, and it's just a hotbed of innovation. And they have a thing on Thursday nights. Where they have open beer for innovators and people to come in and network, and VCs show up, and it might be something. It's called the Venture Cafe. Might be worth looking into. Anyway, we work with companies that are building businesses and are either raising capital or getting towards the end of their life cycle and selling. And we've done that for about 8 or 10 years now. And over the years, we felt that as we were raising money for these companies, they would then go off and become, fairly significant businesses. Our focus has been in the online advertising ad tech market. So we've worked with companies like Tremor Media, Context Web, Media Math, Media 6 Degrees, AdSafe. Most of you probably have no idea what I'm talking about because they're a very kind of behind the scenes group of business-to-business companies that power sort of advertising and messaging on the internet, and probe into your lives and get all your secrets and then respin them back to you. Anyway, it's a pretty fast-growing market, and we felt after a while, after handing over or going and soliciting capital from people like Canaan Partners or DFJ or Venrock and others, that we were giving them these great companies and then sort of getting paid a little measly fee and then walking away and feeling like we'd sort of given away the baby. And so we decided a few years ago to start investing our own capital in, and then last year we raised a $10 million fund to put money into companies at the earlier stage and then help them grow into later stage of ventures. Does that mean I'm finished? So.
I think that means they didn't turn their phone off.
That's it. Okay.
Siri's talking back.
Anyway, so in the past year we've invested in 7 companies. 3 of them are mobile related businesses. One's called Every Screen Media, which is a mobile DSP, which means a demand side platform. It's a way for advertisers to buy mobile inventory. Another one is called Localytics, which is here in Cambridge. It's a software that is used on apps, and we should all be using it, of course, to help monitor how people are using your apps. So they have 3,000 or so publishers, from Wall Street Journal, New York Times, on down to tiny little publishers, and helps those publishers understand how people navigate through their apps, where they get hung up, where whether they're converting in terms of going from a free user to a premium user, and what are the right ways to drive people in that direction to make your app more profitable. But anyway, so they're here in Cambridge, very great and nice guys, and I'm sure they'd welcome hearing from you. So that's Localytics, and then a company called Local Response. And Local Response is a New York-based business that is aggregating mobile check-ins. So whether it's explicit check-ins like Foursquare or Gowalla, or implicit check-ins such as I'm on Twitter, hey, I'm going to the Yankees game, or I'm going to Macy's, they then message back to those people advertising messages like Yankees suck, obviously. So that's what those guys do, and but they actually they have a campaign running right now, for example, with Verizon, where if you text, God, I'm so sick of my AT&T connection, or I can never get a signal, Verizon then messages you right back and says, well, actually, if here's $100 towards switching to Verizon. And they've got 135% click-through rate because it's getting retweeted by people, and it's been a terrific campaign. So, so my interest in terms of investing, and I think this sort of maybe give you some guidance of where investors start to think about is in companies that are solving a real problem, that are creating some new efficiency, and have really thought through a business model that involves making money, strange though it may seem, either through advertising support or through as a paid application, or what I'm starting to think of as sort of as an annuity application. So sort of a SaaS business model where either you're buying points or you're sort of participating, kind of just continuing to feed the trough. And the gamers, for example, I think on average, I read they're making $4 per active user on iPhones, whereas and about $1.80 or $1.90 on the Android platform. So, so for all those, the Zynga games and all that, that's a lot of money. If you can get millions of people to download it, they're making $4 per active user per year. that's some real cash. So, but that all doesn't come without any, without challenges. And I think there's certainly a perception and there's a possibility out there to go and build the next big app. But there's some real challenges. For one is that there are 500,000 apps, give or take 100,000, that are in the market right now. So that's a lot of competition. And the other big problem I think that people have been facing is the leaderboard model of promoting the apps on iPhone and the iPhone platform, an iOS platform. So if you're a top 10 app or a top 50 app, you're going to get a lot of clicks and you're going to get a lot of downloads. But if you're new, how do you break through? How do you get people's attention? How do you create that viral experience? And so, what we've seen is a lot of app developers working together, sharing, promoting each other, and trying to sort of help win over their way back up the model, up the leaderboard. And so, there's a lot of, there's a tremendous amount of innovation going on, and you're starting to see the larger traditional media companies now putting the full weight of their market share in traditional television and radio and print into building apps as well, and then they have the ability to throw it up on Monday Night Football and say, hey, download the Monday Night Football app. That's a pretty big promotion. So that's stuff that we can't buy, right, as startup people. We don't have the ability to go and buy a Super Bowl ad and get millions of people to download it. So, I think the challenge for innovators in the app world is that as the big traditional media companies start to put their brands behind these apps, it will make it difficult to, for startups to get above that noise and above that sort of natural promotion that those companies have. But anyway, so I'm happy to chat further, but I think I probably used up my 10 minutes. So, Mark, your turn.
So Mark, what's your perspective?
Is this where I'm supposed to dispute everything you just said?
You're gonna try, yeah.
Jane, you ignorant slut. No. It's a Saturday Night Live joke from the 70s for those.
You're dating yourself.
In my age group and the rest, I can't help you. Exactly. Thank you for inviting me, David. I've had the opportunity to work with David for a number of years with one of my prior companies, but I've been asked to give about 2 sentences on me and really to refer you to my LinkedIn profile. But I've been doing this for about 25 years. I've worked with established companies and startup companies. So established companies like Lotus Development in the 80s up the road, which is now IBM. Video conferencing companies also in the 90s, like PictureTel, which is now Polycom. So I'm very accustomed to working with companies in the earliest stages, and I had the opportunity to actually start my own company and raise money. So for those of you who are looking to raise money, I bear the scars. I know what it's like. I know what it's like to talk to 100 and some odd VC firms and hear no, and then the 101st says yes. So it's an interesting experience, and it's very it's not very fun, but I've gone through that, and I've actually had the opportunity to work with Nick in a prior life, and had a very good experience with Nick and his team, and highly recommend them actually, as I do David with Robert Nutter. I'm currently at a company called Illume Software, which, as David mentioned, is a company that everybody loves to hate. Our software is a communications platform that prevents texting and driving. Not that any of you would use your phone and check your email or check your voicemail or anything. So I'm sort of public enemy number one. This is the application you want on, as I think I was saying to Bob or somebody earlier, this is the application you want on everyone else's phone but your own. Sort of like the people that don't want to get vaccinated because they assume that if they don't get vaccinated, everyone else will. It's been an interesting and challenging business to be part of. It was started by a Connecticut housewife who was driving with one of her new drivers and nearly got killed while the kid went to pick up the phone when it was ringing, and you can kind of see what happens when you turn the wheel. And very quickly they built a group of investors and board members and advisors. We have 2 ex-senators, we have an ex-CEO of one of the AT&T operating units, and built an interesting team and raised approximately $7 million, including the Commonwealth of Massachusetts through their fund, MTDC. So it's been quite interesting. As an entrepreneur, I'm in the process of beginning to step away from Illume and look at starting another company. So I'm back on the treadmill again in terms of raising money, and actually had my first VC meeting with my new thing this morning. So prior to that, I was founder and CEO of a company called AirPrint Networks, which did secure mobile document management. And we were one of the first to come up with a small mobile printer back when you couldn't read stuff off the screens, but you needed a physical artifact of certain transactions, like a coupon or a boarding pass. And that was the context I worked both with Nick and with David in. And AirPrint was interesting. Again, we raised $4 million, and I think in terms of the lessons learned, one of the things I did right was I formed a strategic relationship early on with Motorola and Motorola Ventures, and was able to partner with them as if I was a portfolio company. I had they ultimately did invest a little bit and ended up with some equity. And then ended up also getting another strategic investor out of Japan. And again, I think I was talking with Bob earlier in the back, I think is where Bob's sitting, about working with Japanese companies and Japanese investors. And I found them very, very interesting to work with. And they were an investor and also a supplier of ours and an R&D partner. AirPrint kind of was I guess it's fair to say we were a victim of the I guess it was end of '09, when the market shut down. My 2 strategic investors, Alps was one of them, Alps Electric of Japan, announced a historic layoff. They laid off about 14,000 people, lost billions, first time in their 60-year history. And it was a disaster. They've never, for those of you who've worked with or are aware of how Japanese companies work, they don't typically lay people off. So this was unprecedented. and it was right as we were running out of money, so we ended up putting that up on the shelf for a little while. I'm going to keep within my 10 minutes if I can. I wanted to comment, and we talked about it as we prepared for this discussion, sort of this notion of getting, again, it's about funding your mobile phone business or your iPhone business. When you present to folks like Nick and folks that he might help you meet, you know, they're always looking for this, you know, swing for the fences, A-team concept. And there's, I've noted that there's this tension between what I've heard is the concept of people would rather fund an A team with a C plan versus a C team with an A plan. And with the current market, and again, you can agree or not, I think you need an A team with an A plan at this point. People are just not looking for superstars with a crappy idea, concept, or crappy plan. They're looking for superstars with a superstar concept. So it's become, I think, a little bit more difficult in some regards, but also I think the things that should be funded, that have great teams and great products, are, as a result, I think, getting funded again. I may be right or wrong, but and the other thing I've learned is that it's really important, and this is not an advertisement for David Pauser at Nutter, but it's really important to, he doesn't pay me, but it's very important to have good counsel on the patent side and on the business side, because I think that really helps you set up your financing plan, your patent strategy. So whomever you choose, I think it's really good to know folks in that area and get some counsel there. It's also important, I know he's going to talk a little bit about, you know, alternative funding, but the best form of funding is get a deal, get revenue. It's non-dilutive. Guys like Nick and the people that he knows love to see companies that don't have a concept, that they have revenue, that they can show that, you know, gosh, people are buying this stuff. That's the greatest form of funding I think you can get. And again, I don't think anybody would disagree with that. And the other comment I wanted to make is about sort of selecting the VC investor if you're going that route. Don't go to every one. I actually did that. I went to 120 or so VC investors. Pick the right ones, figure out what they invest in, figure out who the right partner is, what the partner's portfolio specialties are. You don't want to go to just to be obvious, but you don't want to go to a firm investing in bio when you've got a mobile app company. They'll probably hear you out for a few minutes, but you will waste your time. So don't overshot the deal either. And I think I may stop there on the intro because I think we're going to start going into platforms and others as part of the discussion, but I have some points of view on platforms.
What's your new company?
Oh, so I'm starting a company called I'll talk to you about it later. No, I'm starting a new company called Impromptu Networks, which is disruptive in the connected devices space. So think about a very inexpensive way to narrowcast, which again might be appropriate for you, narrowcast using a small, inexpensive device, $200 or $300 device versus a $20,000 or $30,000 device. We can talk more about it later. Great. That was my 10 minutes.
Okay. Hi, I'm Chris Deschenes, as Dave alluded to, and I'm VP product at a company called CADnexus. And we're incidentally not a mobile app company per se, but we're running into a lot of the same kinds of startup issues that anybody in the mobile space would be running into. And what we've decided to do is bootstrap. So our company actually has customers. We've not taken $1 of outside funding. And part of what I'm trying to do in terms of building the product out is enable us to fund new feature development, build out the product, in addition to servicing the customers that we already have. So and there's 4 of us, and we've been in business for about 4 years. So we all wear multiple hats, meaning we all have multiple jobs, and these aren't 8-hour days. It's really tough. Technology was spun out of the Aero-Astro Lab here at MIT, and most of the development for that was funded by NASA and some large corporations. So you have a professor or somebody who's sitting over here who's really taking requirements from the labs or whatnot and getting funded to do specific development to satisfy those requirements, and they're a customer. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be a large commercial success, and that's where the productization comes into play, and identifying what kind of markets you can get this technology into, et cetera, et cetera. So Along those lines, we've gone after SIBRs, or Small Business Innovative Research, the government program for that. It's very large. I'm not going to bore you with numbers in terms of things that you can find at sbir.gov or whatnot, but I'll give you some high-level details about it. The demographics are spread throughout the country. Some key things are that might be relevant to this audience are that you kind of have to be U.S. citizens, or at least green card holders, or naturalized somehow. They don't let foreign nationals even really kind of work on this stuff. And foreign companies are definitely not allowed to propose on this stuff. They can propose, but their proposals won't be reviewed. Several government agencies do this stuff, and DoD is by far the largest, and maybe the most interesting. NASA also is prolific in this, but you've also got NSF, which is a little harder to get grant funding from them on the business side, especially if you have academic roots, because you have to work really hard to overcompensate with the fact that you don't have the quote-unquote business expertise, because you're coming from an academic perspective. DOE also sends out these solicitations. DoD is quarterly, so you get certain components of the DoD, for instance, Army, Navy, Air Force, DARPA. They each sort of dominate one of the cycles. So if you have something that you think is very applicable to the Army, I think the summer cycle for the SBIRs tends to have many more Army topics than, say, Navy, who really dominates the end of the year cycle. So each government component has its own twist on how the proposals are done, what the performance is, but it's all, the background for it is laid by Congress, so it's funded by law, and every year they threaten not to fund it or to short fund it, but they really end up funding it because it really fuels innovation. So they want to make sure that the war fighters, at least in today's day and age, that since 9/11, that there is innovation getting introduced into the DoD type things and government type things, and they can't rely on the really large companies to do it, because they have their own issues to deal with. So as a small company, you have to say, well, here's this potential source of funding, which is, one, non-dilutive. I don't have to give anybody any equity for this. And if I get it, I can kind of use the money the way I want, as long as I'm developing towards the plan that I put together, and I can report progress on that and whatnot, and it's reasonable. Having said that, there is one or two hooks, right? There always is. So the technology that you develop with the government's money, they have typically shared rights on, and unlimited rights. They can't sell it and go give it to somebody else to commercialize, but if you have something that is going to become viral in the Army, for instance, you got to wonder if your secret sauce now is not being overly discounted because you've taken, say, $100K to develop the first prototype of this. Government has shared rights of the gold nugget of this or whatever. So you really can't go after them as the market. So what advice I hear is that you make sure that you do that highly valuable proprietary part of these things on your own dime, or on your own time, or on the weekends, or at night, or whenever else everybody gets to do this stuff, and use this other money to do the more basic stuff and build out the infrastructure and whatnot. And that's a good way to retain your IP. You can talk to these guys about putting a moat around it and whatnot. This is not inexpensive to do. To do a phase one proposal, for instance, will take somebody that kind of knows what they're doing and is passionate about what they've got going on a good couple of weeks to write. So it's kind of like a mini business plan, 20 pages of technical proposal for engineers that don't necessarily like to write. Certainly it's not their favorite thing to do, can be mind-numbing to do. So typically what you get is, what I find is, the other thing about these is deadlines. When we're running our own shop, we can say, hey, we want to release next Friday. Okay, fine. not gonna be next Friday, a couple things came up, soccer game I had to go to, we'll push it out a month. With this stuff, they're real deadlines. So if a proposal is due Friday by 5 p.m., end of business or whatnot, it's all electronically submitted. If you don't have everything together by 4:59 p.m., you're out. So you could have spent a month developing all of this proposal, getting everything lined up. If for some reason you can't get that thing submitted, you gotta wait till the next cycle. And the next cycle could be 6 months, it could be 12 months, depending on what component you're trying to go after. So there is risk associated with it because there's opportunity cost with the time you spend going after this and developing these ideas, as opposed to maybe talking to somebody like Nick or actually doing more prototype development. So you have to kind of make that judgment as you go along as to whether it's viable. Phase 1 typically is upwards of $100,000 now, and the time for performance of that is about 6 months. So that's not too bad. You can do some prototyping, especially in this mobile space. I think you can do a decent prototype within that amount of time. And for some of these government components, they don't even require you to actually develop a prototype. They just want you to sort of look at the highest technical risk that's involved in the idea that you have and do some experiments to try to reduce that risk. Report it, and if it looks like you've done the job and you're the right people to do it, you can potentially go to phase 2. Now, phase 2s are up to 50 pages of technical proposal, and keep in mind, you also have to do the financials. You have to adjust the market so that you can convince the government that what you're doing actually will have a market to go to once you get it built. For them, commercialization post 9/11 means there will be other uses for this in the government or in the prime contractors, for instance. Prior to that, they were looking at commercialization and being real commercialization, like consumer level apps and that kind of thing. But that's the emphasis on that is certainly dropped off. So you have to convince them that yes, you have people that are willing to take this technology that you're developing and put it in play, at least in a prototypical sense, or some sort of experimental sense in their company or some part of government. And that's not necessarily easy to do. It takes some time to build those relationships where somebody would say, Raytheon will say, fine, we'll take your prototype and we'll be an alpha site or a beta site for this. Why? Because there are huge problems with that. The engineers are going to take time to take your software and play with it in-house. You have to convince management that that's a good thing for them to do, and that comes directly out of their overhead. So imagine the portfolio of things that they have to spend time on as engineers in a company like that. So it's not a slam dunk. But also, referral letters are key. So if I do a proposal, I'm definitely out looking for 1 or 2 companies that will say, yes, we endorse what they're doing, we're familiar with the field, we think it's great, and it would be an advantage over the present state of the art or whatnot. So if you can have a few of those things, then that gives you the credibility. And pedigree. Obviously, if you're coming out of here, you've got the technical expertise, and you've got the technical credibility. If you're talking about things that are over your head, then who reviews these things? There are people in the big companies that are senior engineers, principal engineers. There are people, other engineers in government. They can look at this stuff and know just by a whiff test on the executive summary or whatnot whether or not this thing has any legs. Not so much from a blow it out on the business side, but technically, is what you're proposing sound? Is the schedule that you're putting together realistic to accomplish the goals that you say you're trying to meet in terms of risk reduction and trying to figure out, will this concept actually work? Given the kinds of resources we have to put on this thing, excuse me. So again, if you know what you're doing and you've done a few of these, a proposal can take a couple of weeks. That's for phase 1. And if you get it, you have to be able to negotiate with the government to say, okay, we're going to track our hours, which a lot of entrepreneurs certainly don't like to do. You have to have a little bit more discipline in terms of reporting or whatnot, but you get checks, you get to bill these guys, and you can pay yourself. That's huge if you're like bootstrapped, or if you're running low on cash, or you can imagine any kind of scenario that would be good. And if you do a really good job and you come up with a prototype, maybe you've learned something about the area that you're exploring, that's an interesting in and of itself. You come up with a cool prototype, get that to them, and they invite you to do a phase 2 proposal, which not everybody gets. There's certainly a down select. For NASA, just by being awarded a phase 1, you're invited to do a phase 2. Army, for instance, we did one, we did a phase 1. We had to do the proposal, because it doesn't cost them anything to say, yes, please give us a proposal. So you go out, you spend 2-3 weeks getting everything together, and then there's a down select. So maybe 40% of the phase 1 awards actually make it to phase 2. That's $1 million or $750,000 over 2 years. So that's enough to fund a team to go do some real damage in terms of building out a market a little bit and building out the technology if that's where you're at. If you're trying to use this money to do pure business development and hire a bunch of salespeople and that kind of thing, it's too early for that. There's another phase 3 part of all of this, which they expect you to get additional outside funding in addition to the government funding. And I think that's kind of open-ended. But the reality is, I think that a fair amount of the work that's done under these research contracts ends up on the shelf for various reasons, for IP reasons, or you found that it just wasn't the right approach, and you want to just go with this or move on, take what you've learned and go do something else. And probably not important here, but there are companies that it's actually how they eat and feed themselves is they do SBIRs, and they're prolific at it. They have it down to a system, the machine really, they have the talent and degrees and whatnot, so that they can command the attention of all these government entities. And there are research companies around here, certainly that we work with. We're sort of one, and we all sort of team together so that it looks like we're bigger than we are. And it lessens the risk for that government person that we may or may not know to say, hey, this has a good chance, we should fund it. And it becomes even more so when you look at phase 2 or whatnot. But think of it like this. If you have this mobile app idea, and you can somehow map it to like a government type of need, which they're getting more friendly to it. If you do a search on the web, you'll see warfighters are starting to play with iPads a little bit for geolocation and mapping on the field. Obviously, there's security concerns. What if the thing gets captured? What if the network gets sniffed? All of these kinds of things come to play. And those things commercially really aren't up to any of those standards that the military would expect in quality or secure or whatnot. So that's an opportunity, right? Because, hey, there are great applications for this thing on the military side. They're relying on things that weigh 45 pounds and start power like crazy. And here we have the best technology that's out there, and it's not accessible to them because they're 10 years behind the curve. And it's costing us all of that in the meantime. So I think it's viable to look at that and say, okay, the platform that we're going to deliver this on is an iPad, for instance, if it's some particular kind of software capability, or something lower level at an engineering level to say, we think we have a really good solution for security for a power-hungry, lightweight format like an iPad or whatnot, or durability kind of thing, materials. I think I've exceeded my time, but I can keep going if you like.
Why don't you hold off for a second? What we're going to do is go around the room, and I'll just sort of point out people. If you raise your hand, you can raise it while someone else is talking. I'll try to acknowledge you. But let me, I guess, quote unquote moderators prior. Let me start with a question that may be if I can get the question out, maybe the blur that we had written up for this program. I think folks who have attended enough MIT Enterprise Forum or other like events will have a sense of the sort of the maxims of maybe perhaps starting a business, but I think more relevant tonight, the maxims of getting funding for a business. Those maxims, I suppose, are changed, as Mark has commented, in light of the economy. I mean, it's tougher. A team, a company, a team, a idea. Got that. But I think relevant to tonight, if I could start with this question, it would be, how do the maxims change, or which ones do you need to focus on, or what are the new ones to keep in mind when you're talking about funding an iPhone, any mobile app? what changes, and it's for both of you, Mark and Nick.
Well, I think, I'll start. Why not? I can So, I think, one of the things that we've always counseled our clients on the banking side to think about is right along with what Chris was saying, sort of know your customer. So he talked a lot about the government as a customer and how to understand that customer. The venture market, which is the market that my firm typically works with, or the private equity market, is a very constantly evolving and changing market. They work on cycles, so they are typically a 10-year fund, and they have the beginning of the fund where they invest in a bunch of things really quickly, and then they kind of slow down, and as the fund gets older, they like to invest in a little bit more mature companies because they want those companies to cycle back out of the fund towards the end. So it's important to try to figure out what your customers is what they're doing, where they are, and you can figure that out in part by looking at what they're investing in right about now. A lot of people think like, oh well, he just invested in this, so he'll invest in mine. Well, actually, because he just invested in something that's like yours, he probably won't necessarily invest in yours because there'll be some duplication. So you want to find, we often look for things like people who have invested in SaaS software, but they're kind of cycling that SaaS software investment out of their fund, so they're looking for a new SaaS software type of application. Or, in the case of a mobile app, there are certainly, or in case of mobile, there's certainly funds that are designed and developed specifically for mobile. So Klein & Perkins has a $100 million fund they put together for the iPhone, and then they put another $100 million fund together for the iPad, and that's all for app development. And so that's a very purposeful fund, and they're going to be much more flexible about potential conflicts of duplicate investments. But so I'd say that knowing your customer is really critical. And the other thing is that the venture market has changed a lot, even just in the last 5 or 10 years. We work with a lot of entrepreneurs who have been through this before, and they come back out after their last company, and they go back and they say, well, I'm going to go to Charles River, and I'm going to go to Polaris and Highland and Atlas Venture, and those firms have changed dramatically since maybe you were in your last fundraising. And so Highland is now doing much later stage, almost private equity investments, mezzanine capital right before a company goes public, but they're also putting money in very early stage startups. Atlas Venture has basically moved away from a lot of the traditional venture and moved also to early stage. A lot of these guys are kind of abandoning the middle, and so they're sort of fascinated by the new stuff, and they're fascinated by the stuff that's definitely proven and is right on the right path towards an exit. But the middle area, which is where you're in your sort of B or C or D round, is really a challenge right now for a lot of companies. And it sort of reminded me of what you were saying about your SBIR process, because there are a lot of people will put a lot of money into phase one, which is that startup, $250 here or $500,000 for there. But and some of these big venture firms are known for doing this right now, which is causing a lot of problem. Where they're, Highland or Atlas comes in with $250,000 into a fund, which is really a $200 million fund. So they need to put a lot more money to work than just that $250. So that $250 is really kind of a call or an option on your company. So they may put in $250 into 20 different companies. But I can tell you right now, they're not going to fund 20 companies into the A round or the B round. And so what happens, and I'm sort of getting off topic a little bit, but what happens for the entrepreneur is you get into the situation where you go and say, okay, Bob Davis, I want to do my A round now. And Bob says, well, you're not one of the chosen ones. I'm sorry. And so go out and find some other investors, and I'll come into the round, I'll support it, but you should go find that other investor. Or even worse, I'm not going to be able to support this next round. Don't quote me on Bob, because I want to get this so you're not filming this, right?
Too late. Smile, give me a hand.
So, but then
There's
the
an
challenge is that, is that Atlas gets pitched the same deal, and they see Bob's on the board. Why isn't he coming in? So that's a real challenge, and there's a lot of sort of pushback right now going on for a lot of entrepreneurs who we're getting into this point. They get a venture guy to come in really early, and then they get up to the traditional venture round, and it's kind of lonely. So anyway, so it's important to understand that the investors that you're talking to, they are the right stage investor for what you need. So a $200 or $300 million fund probably shouldn't be putting in $100,000 bets, because it just doesn't scale for them. And so, you have to understand that the impact perhaps on your company if they do come in that early.
Well, let me interrupt.
Yeah.
So if somebody, you encourage me to do this, Dave, just for folks who've never dealt with the VCs, if VC firm X, Y, or Z puts $250,000 in, how much, well, that's a spray and pray technique, was what I've heard that identified as. How much are they looking to get out from 250? Let's say if you exited 10x.
Yeah, I mean it's.
So if they put in $2 million, they expect to make $20 million.
Yeah.
So understand the metrics when you go. So if you think you've gotten that $250,000 and it's all done, and your friend Bob Davis, your ex-friend Bob Davis, doesn't follow on, I mean, you're host. You have to understand their expectations. I think another, you talk about the government side. I think on the mobile app development side, another form of funding is really the assistance or the strategic funds that are not investment funds that folks like right now Microsoft have a pretty fair kitty if you want to develop for the new Windows Phone 7 operating system, not a Microsoft shill. But they're writing checks to development firms to have you port or produce a really compelling app for their environment. Apple a little less so because everybody wants to do it. Android a little less so because everybody wants to do it. Although there's a Google Ventures office around the corner.
So you're saying Microsoft's like the government?
Well, to an extent, and also RIM, who are leading market share, are paying people to port to their platform. So it's just an avenue that you might want to look at. Being part of their partner programs, which costs nothing, will give you access to things like the BlackBerry Partners Fund, which is a nice little strategic fund, and you might get some attention. But again, it's non-dilutive to the SBIR point. I think it's a place you need to look. And also for those of us in the mobile apps world, the operators have funds, and they also have the ability to write little checks or help with development. Our friends at Verizon have a 4G LTE center in Waltham, and they work with Vodafone, who's a partner or parent company, if you will, of Verizon, and they have a West Coast version of that in San Jose, I believe, or in Silicon Valley. So you might also look at the operators. If you're writing a really great iPhone app and it's somehow going to move the needle for the operators, and I wanted to talk about moving the needle a little bit. To move the needle at an operator and to gain an investment from them, it has to be a huge, big, honking, successful app. It's got to move earnings per share, the stock price, something, significant dent in revenue. So a $10 Angry Birds knockoff isn't going to move the needle, and you're not going to get any attention. But if it's a really cool thing that somehow improves quality, improves security, you've got the attention of the operator, and they have folks out there looking to meet with you and talk with you. And literally, right in Waltham, right by the reservoir, there's a 4G development center for Verizon, and they're a great resource. So I just wanted to kind of drop that in to augment what these guys are saying. VCs are fun to talk to. You'll spend, if someone said yes, this is the other thing, the notion of saying yes, if someone commits funding to you from a Series A investment firm, and you're like thinking, oh God, any minute the EFT, the fund transfer is coming in. What is it, 9 months from 6 months, let's say, from yes to actually giving you the check? It's a number of months. So plan your cash flow accordingly if you did get to a yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think another thing is that there's a whole new crop of VCs, of which maybe our little firm is part of, but there's a whole crop of firms that no one's really heard of yet, which are are growing very quickly. A lot in New York because of the New York media and advertising markets. But there's they're sort of considered micro VCs or bands of angels or super angels. You may have heard these terms. Ron Conway is sort of the most famous one on the West Coast. Dave McClure also on the West Coast. And these guys they're doing a little bit of spray and pray, I'd say, and they're investing in 40 companies a year, 50 companies a year. I mean, really putting a lot of money to work. But out of those, they come up with Twitter as one of them, or they come up with Facebook as another. So I mean, that is one approach. In this area, so Next View Ventures is one. There's a bunch of former VCs, sort of principal VCs got together and started a fund. Guys like David Beisel, Rob Go. There's a fund here called Launch Capital, which has put a lot of money to work. They do about 30 to 40 investments a year. And they are just here in Cambridge, over by Harvard Square area. Founder Collective is another one where you have a bunch of founders who put money, founders of startup companies put money into a group that is then investing in with sort of the guidance and the due diligence from these other entrepreneurs. And they're a very good group. So there's a I encourage you to look below the veneer of the top 10 or 20 or 50 VCs to that next tier, the next generation. The other is angel groups. Now the jury's still out on angel groups, and I'm a member of Launchpad, which is out in it's out in Waltham now. I guess it was in Wellesley before, but Launchpad in particular, but Common Angels and Hub Angels and a bunch Boston Harbor Angels. Yeah, they've become very. I think they've really sped up their processes. I think a lot of people complain, sort of like, send me your business plan. I'll review it next month, and then next month, which in front of the analysis committee or whatever, the screening committee, and then if that works, then you can come the next month. And by now you're like 4 months down the road, and you haven't gotten it even to pitch anybody. So they've really compressed their process, and I know that Launchpad has been quite prolific and invested a lot of money last couple of years. And I think a lot of the others are as well. I think Commons actually now raised a first, or I think maybe a second fund. So they're investing not just as angels, but actually as a sort of micro VC fund. So there's a lot of that going on. And I think what's good too is Boston is particularly mobile. Is a particularly mobile market. There's been a lot of good mobile advertising companies that have started here. That many have been bought by companies in New York or in the West Coast, but I think there's a good kind of DNA for mobile, in this town, which is healthy, and hopefully those people come back and then they as entrepreneurs, successful entrepreneurs, hopefully also reinvest into their own into new companies and new ideas, and we do. As we go out and if we're putting money into a company, we certainly go and look for those kinds of people because they'll bring more than just the capital, certainly their name and reputation and their connections into whoever they've been working with over the years are tremendous.
So questions? You force me to ask one. Oh, go next one.
I was wondering, my name is Keely. I work at Children's Hospital Boston. I'm in the tech transfer office, and our physicians and our bioinformatics research team are constantly coming up with new apps. My job in the office is to start to think about a business model so that we can actually pitch this to a company that can take it into a product or spin it off into a startup company. And I'm always thinking about revenue model, and I'm just wondering, in the direct-to-consumer space, healthcare or otherwise, or actually trying to sell to the healthcare audience, what are the different revenue models? And let's say you want to do a direct-to-consumer healthcare kind of app. How many users do you have to get before you can have a viable advertising model?
That's a big question. I'll take a first shot at it. I mean, I think there's a big distinction. So B2C, or business to consumer, versus B2B. businesses are very different. You know, in the business to consumer model, you're trying to get millions of people or hundreds of thousands of people to use the product, and those tend to be free apps that have maybe some advertising, or if you're a large institution or a media company, you have some other sort of brand value of having the people use it. So, you know, I would think in Children's Hospital case, they would, or they should, I would think, want to have people think of Children's Hospital when they're planning to have their babies, and sort of select, you know, and make more money off of that selection of going there for healthcare decisions than focusing on making $1 for the app. You know, like you know, birthing a child is probably a good amount of money. I've birthed 3 in Children's Hospital, not me personally, but
More expensive.
you know, and I'm sure my insurance company, you know, paid, you know, thousands of dollars. So, you know, so your brand message is like, you know, we want to serve and give you all this information and help you out and help you make your, you know, birth planning decisions. I'm just making up this app right now in my head, but you know, and so you get a lot of people using it, and then they just naturally say, well, God, you know, Children's Hospital's been so helpful for me for the last 9 months, might as well go there and have the baby, and that's worth, you know, a good chunk of change for Children's Hospital. So that's a consumer direct. As far as, you know, so I would tend, if you want to be successful and broadly used, I would go the free model and expect to get residual value somewhere else in your broader enterprise, right? That's one approach. On the business-to-business side, if you're developing an app for physicians to help them, you know, give them information or data that helps them perform their day-to-day operations, or not specifically operations, but you know, if it's valuable enough, they should pay, you know, $10, $20, $100 for that app and for that continued information they're getting. And there are plenty of services. I mean, we use in our industry, we use services like Capital IQ and use Salesforce.com. We pay thousands of dollars for our teams to use those applications and software packages because the information they give us is valuable to our business, and we can kind of somewhat justify it. And so, you know, if Salesforce.com actually came out with a good app, I would pay good money for it. You know, and so you have to sort of look at the value equation of what your app is delivering to that customer type or base, and see if they can, and then price it according to that need, and then test it out, and try different pricing and see how it goes.
The only thing I'd add to what Nick's saying, it would seem to me, and again, you know, we're kind of speaking the abstract, but the value of having a sponsor to, you know, underwrite the app, Pampers is an example. You know, you're monitoring or somehow watching your child's health as brought to you by Pampers. I think you'll make more money gaining that sponsorship, or whoever you spin the app out to will make more money from that than getting $1 to $4 in the app store. I think it might be easier that way. And I think people are buying personal health apps or using personal health apps, like Hippocrates, which, you know, a lot of docs would use for interactions, medical interactions with prescriptions. And I think they're ad supported as well by the pharma companies. So I think I would look for a business model that provided some form of underwriting from somebody to whom, kind of what Nick was saying, there's a benefit. Maybe children's, maybe partners, maybe, you know, the hospital wants some brand benefit, you know, powered by, you know, Children's Hospital or something like that. But I think really the money is getting Pampers to write you a big check to get in front of all those eyeballs.
Yeah.
So when I come before an investor and I say, you know, this is my model, these are the top 10 companies that we would try to target this to be our premier advertisers. How does that look as a revenue model? What order of magnitude does Pampers pay for visibility, and how many people do I have to have looking at it? I guess that changes for every app. But I was just
Depends on the app. Depends on the app.
Yeah.
But you know, it depends on how many eyeballs you'll attract. So you know, universally, those of us who've had kids, you know, especially in the early years, we're very interested in Pampers. It's a very big deal. So if it's the kind of thing that would be appealing to a new parent, think about what are the things, who are the sponsors that would be appealing, that would be, of concern for new parents, whether it's Pampers or the formula folks or the, whomever.
Do you know that the margin on Pampers, Pampers and Procter & Gamble makes more money margin-wise on Pampers and diapers than the auto manufacturers make on an entire car. So there's money in diapers. So
Plastics, oh, sorry.
other stuff in diapers too, but the point is, I think as far as thinking about the app too, you want to make it, I think, on the front end frictionless, like as quickly as possible. You want to allow people to come in, try it out, and give them some value. There's also a lot of this sort of annuity kind of app kind of world where you can say either to get a little bit more, or I need to know, and you can get things like people asking you, can I know what your location is, right? Or is it okay if I connect you with Facebook so I can get a little bit more data on you? And so, I think on the front end you want to have it be as open and receptive as possible to the consumer. Give them something of value, give them some tool or monitor or something, and then think about ways to monetize kind of by opening up new kind of chapters in the book within the app itself. And those things could be either just give me some data, and the data is like, are you male, female, how old are you, how many kids do you have, are you thinking about a baby anytime soon, so sort of go down that path, or have them pay you cash money for them. I mean, there's two different ways.
And also
The data can be valuable.
referrals within the app. So I want more information on this. I'm reading about a diagnosis for my kid, and it says, you might try these kinds of things. For more information, click here. The clicks are of value, and if it's very targeted, I want to hear now about diaper rash, and it's related to a diaper rash cream, and of course we're picking, children's hospital sort of functions.
You're talking about children, right?
But yeah, I mean, that's a valuable click. If I say, my kid has a rash now, I want to solve it so she shuts the hell up and lets me sleep. I have too many kids, sorry. And I mean, that's a valuable stuff. It's here and now and me. That is worth a lot more money than, just trolling around looking for, vague information.
And Siri can't answer that.
Siri can't answer it.
Okay.
Not for you at least.
Thank you.
There's a question, I'm sorry, a question over here.
I was going to say, what about, probably with respect more to healthcare oriented towards adults, and especially the aging baby boom generation, what about a revenue model involving insurance companies to have apps that maintain your schedule of, check this, check that, have some sort of, I've read about certain devices where you can check your own cholesterol, you can be any number of things, but wouldn't the insurance companies and not to mention the government have an interest in perhaps having people monitor their health more often, more frequently?
Yeah, I assume that they would, and the question I think is how do you monetize it? So you might come up with this app that is compelling, and you have your insurance company say, we'll give you a 5% discount if you download this app off our site, and then we monitor your usage of it or whatnot, so it's compelling for people to do it. But is it just enough to get people to actually do that stuff health-wise for what the insurance company needs to make money from? So it's not clear to me how a third party might develop this and have a business plan associated with it. If we were inside, say, Blue Cross Blue Shield or whatever, in our own little unit, we might say, hey, here's a great thing, let's try it, or let's hire an outside firm or something. But I don't think I would go to Nick and say, let's try this. Because I don't know how I would monetize it.
Well, the other thing is insurance is very highly regulated, of course, and not only from a privacy and a HIPAA standpoint, but in terms of rates and rate setting and discounts. This is something I'm doing with my company currently, where we're trying to offer to insurance companies the software to make people drive safer, and the inference is if you use my software, you're driving safer, therefore the risk is lower, therefore you ought to give a discount on car insurance. So it's out of the health, but more along the same lines with dealing with insurance companies. I've spent 3 years talking to insurance companies about lowering risk, giving a slight discount on your rate, and the bottom line is it will take several years before any of the insurance companies gather enough actuarial data to write, you know, kind of like the SBR application, to go write an application to the various state insurance boards to give away that discount. So you have to look for another way to monetize that kind of idea, in my opinion.
But something that is cool is, I don't know if you're a runner, you might have run into Runkeeper, which does everything. It's cheap, you know, if you have one of these or an iPhone or whatnot, it tracks by GPS, so it gives you everything in the calorie count and whatnot. So that's a killer app. And I guess the answer is create a killer app, which is easy to say, much harder to actually do.
Well, this is also the challenge I think I see in a lot of these businesses that say, okay, well, you know, these marketing people are like, let's build an app around our product, and you know, well, again, it's sort of a, you know,
Light dawns on Nick.
yeah. So, but the maybe I can use something. So the, you know, there are a lot of companies that
It's a comforting sound.
yeah, everything's fine. A lot of marketers will say, well, we have to have an app. Our competitors have an app. We better get an app too. And so they go find an app builder and they build an app, and nobody cares because nobody really wants to keep track of how long have I had my shoelaces. Maybe I should change them every 6 months or something. You know, I mean, there's no, you know, these apps are out there. There's actually a client that we had at one point that they had AccuView or something as a contact lens manufacturer, and they found that people who use, this is actually before the app world, this is a web-based thing, they found that people who were notified that they should reorder contact lenses because it's been 30 days, you know, that they had a much higher, you know, people will typically, you know, stay out late and sleep and not take their contacts out and wear them the next day. And, you know, that's bad for the contact lens business, right? So they had this app that would go and tell you and remind you, and sure enough, you know, those people had a very, very high reorder rate that was higher than their normal reorder rate. But you know what? There's so few people who actually were idiot enough to like download and use this app that it didn't really matter. You know, and so yeah, it works if in a very small sample set of people who are that kind of obsessive about their eyewear. But you know, so you have to think of it and as, you know, is there going to be a broad application for this? Does this make sense? Are we improving life in some form or fashion for a class of society that that they could say, okay, yeah, I'm going to use that, and then that makes sense for that brand or that company to have developed that. So,
And just to amplify one thing, do your market research. That's what Nick experienced this with the company I worked with him on, with AirPrint. We went out and we had a Nielsen market research study, cost us a lot of money, but it was in my development plan. And then we had MIT Sloan students. I had 3 eLab teams who were fantastic, and they were free because it's, you know, part of what they're doing at Sloan. And I would encourage anybody who's like, seriously, you know, if you're looking to create an app, get your research, get a team of MIT students if you can't afford to spend money on expensive market research, and get all the various details of the market and even for, you know, children's, I think, get all the details of the business model ferreted out. You can get what your uptake will be, what's nutrition going to be, who wants what feature, should it be blue, should it be green, do you appeal to moms, do you appeal to dads, do you appeal to kids? You can get a lot of that stuff done, and that's very important. Also, when you go to a guy like this, and I know you want to ask a question, but when you want to go to a guy like this, you have to have your data.
I almost feel like I'm in the wrong meeting, because I'm here because I founded a company back in '69, and we pioneered automatic marine radar for collision avoidance systems. And through the life of the company, which was some 13 years, we sold 550 of them for 43 million, something like that. But we also developed a navigation system based on Loran C and satellite from the Navy Transit. In fact, we pioneered essentially putting charts on top of the radar display, so you not only would avoid collisions, you would stay on your side of the road, if you will, with the lanes in tight spots like the English Channel. And then the third thing we came up with was a fuel-saving autopilot, because the fuel had increased significantly since '74. It had been very flat for decades and suddenly bumped up. And we thought saving fuel was worthwhile, and another three-letter company, I won't use the name because of recording, came into the field and promised, we're going to save fuel by essentially wiggling the rudder less. If you do that, you don't take a super tanker and have it going sideways through the water, you lose speed and it costs you energy. And they offered to do it, if you buy $150,000 worth of equipment, computers system, they do the collision avoidance like we would, the navigation like we would, although we added the Loran because we wanted to do something that they didn't do just to compete and stay in the market, the world shipping market. So we wanted to put the chart lines on top. But with a transit satellite system, it dead reckons in between using a ship's gyro and a through-the-water speed log, which is fine if you're just navigating from Newark to Rotterdam. But if you're going in the English Channel, where you can have 5 knots speed of currents, you're 7.5 miles off in the period that a satellite comes over to correct it. So we did something different and essentially really stabilized the situation in terms of navigation. But in the autopilot thing, they did a very simplistic approach, promised a tremendous saving and didn't do it. So the product was kind of shelved. They came in a little too confident. Took us 5 years to, quote, do it right, because it took us a lot of effort while doing all this other. We had venture capitalists that stuck with us from the first million through 13 years, so they had put in 3.5 for various things, other products and so forth. But then the product for collision avoidance became mandatory. Every ship in the U.S. had to have it by mid-83. And we ramped up because the rest of the world was going to follow suit. And there was essentially 10,000 ships, and only 2,500 had been fitted by then. We were the leader, the Cadillac of the industry. And all of a sudden, in the United Nations, as often happens when governments get involved, they stretched the fitting for 2 years. We laid off 180 people. I've been working for MITEF for 28 years. I've always been thinking of resurrecting this product in the company because it didn't fail for anything that was our fault. And we had very good, well-accepted products. So I've been thinking about preparing for this day, and I retired. I've been at it now 2 months, starting my company. And one of the things that's unique is I'm trying to start it with no venture capital. I'm using 4 retirees like myself, and we're doing it as kind of a hobby because they worked on it before, and it's a matter of dusting it off from this machine language in the mini computer we had to C++. And looking at the numbers, we can do both systems that we did with 2 computers on 2 iPad 2s. I have one. So the big gap I have is that none of our generation knows a damn thing about getting it into an iPad 2 app. I don't want to sell it on the iTunes store, but we can sell this for 1/10 the product cost. As when you look at it, oil has gone up 6 or 8 times since then.
Sure.
And the price of the product, instead of $150,000 a ship for our complete 3-product system, we could make money selling it about 20. My thought is for financing it, to do what the 3-letter company was going to do, we'll give them the damn hardware for nothing, software too. And we want 10% of the savings that we bank by measuring every voyage.
Those are
Cash
hard.
flow is $250,000 a year.
Those are hard deals to cut.
And the other thing is that this is my dream. Let me call it that. But it's cash coming this way, and very soon, because it's strictly a question of programming. I need a good C++ programmer that's had iPad experience. We're going to put it in Mac Mini probably too, but the thing fits like a glove. I've yet to find a showstopper. I'm sure there is one. But anyway, after 2 months in it, I've got the thing rolling. I'm starting to work with agents that we had before, who we got a reputation that goes back 35 years. If I start them on something, say it's coming, it's coming. And what I'm looking for is some help out of this group. If anyone knows any iPad programmers, I'm
So
looking
the answer to that, I'm going to use this as a transition to another section, but the answer to that is stick around afterwards. I think there are several in here.
Okay, that's
I
it.
guess, and if not,
I'm really-
Chris will know where to direct you. Sanjay will also, but there's probably a whole bunch up in the upper reaches there.
I'm gonna go back to the air department, which I graduated from. In fact, the fellow that did the classical and combination of classical and modern control theory, because this is not a naval architecture problem, it's a control problem. Very sophisticated software. I mean, it'll fit in an iPad. I think we can do it, but I'm gonna go there. But I thought I would see the people that really had iPad experience, and I'm thinking of students or whatever. Financial model.
Well, I think that's one of the things, so thank you for your story. I
Well, it's
think
just-
one, it's fascinating, and you are solving a real problem, and that's really a core premise of why people would make an investment. And I understand your approach, which I think is, you know, we're gonna get talent together, people who understand this market and have experience in it, and we're gonna pull it together. And a really important part, and probably the most important part, I think we alluded to this before, which is an A team. You know, you'd rather have an A team with a B idea than a B team with an A idea. And I think part of your success is, or your path to success is about attracting that talent. And whether it's people of your generation, but also attracting the interest of some developers who could help you with the iPad 2 development and helping them understand that this is a big problem that you can solve. You know, that's the kind of stuff that when any company that we work with, if they're able to say, hey, we got this guy who was making $200,000 a year at this other company to jump ship to come with us, that's a pretty big endorsement.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing that if you have real conviction behind what you're doing, you have the numbers, you have experience, and you can develop that team, that's real value. And that's, so I really encourage you, and I think it's a great
the carrot for
area
them is
for-
that with this cash stream flowing in, it's obscene.
Yeah.
Really, even if we don't get 10%, 1%, some kind of a percentage of actual savings, but you've got to prove it. What we did, we sold 20 units with all those low numbers to Texaco and Esso. These were about a half a dozen each and about 4 or 5 others. So there were 20 units that were satisfied users back in '82. Okay, and I gave a paper in general with 6 of them that spoke over there and whatnot. So we got a long history in the public. I want to keep all the names of the company and everything, but I really need help, and there's room in here. I'm looking for people that work for nothing. And my son laughs at me, but that's really the essence of it. Because once the cash starts flowing,
Let me do the following. Let me transition quickly so we can meet part of the promise. I know there's 2 questions here and we'll get to them in order. But we also, part of the promise for this program tonight was something on the technical side. And I don't think it's going to be that technical, but I think it is relevant given this question, which is platform selection. Chris is going to dive into it, and as I understand, platform selection would be a choice of, with what I could look like an iPad versus that is an iOS device versus say Android. But there's probably a bigger set of questions, and these will reach into funding because the platform matters. But Chris, can you start walking us down the road? What should one think about once you've got an idea? Should this be on an iPad or should it be on a different platform?
Sure, real quick, there was a part of this. There was a technical portion for the last meeting, right? Can you say a word about what?
Yeah. So, Right. And actually, would have picked up all you needed about C++ last program if you'd listened closely.
Quick comment.
Yep. Can we?
Quick comment.
Yeah, quick.
Okay. You've got the problem of monetizing it. You've got a core software there, and there's a strategies in open source called Open Core. You give that away free, and then all those other functions around it, you can monetize those.
Okay, let's hold up there. So, so just jump me back. Actually, you guys can talk afterwards because you both have naval backgrounds, as I understand it.
Well, this is core. This is software.
Different issue. So the last program a month ago, Shari Sharanjit, who is also one of the organizers, gave an overview, sort of a manager's overview on how one would get an iOS, as an iPhone project started. And it was specifically on how would you download the software development kit. It was sort of proving, as I saw it, I'm reaching in my pocket for my phone, but it's up there videotaping us so we can report back to your superiors. But as I saw the program last month, it was, is it really that hard to get something running on one of these devices? And Shrisha's point, and I don't think it was true, but it sounded good, was that you could get an app running if you, but from download, you could essentially download and get an app running. It would be a test app, sort of a Hello World app, in half an hour. I think the reality is you have a pretty fast download to do that. But in any event, the point was it was quick. And it was easy to get some app going. And then it was a question of going from Hello World to world domination. And that's where you need the C++ program. But then Chris is going to tell us that we should be using Android for that instead.
Well, it depends. I think, quick question, how many software architects are out here? Okay, how many like hardcore programmers know Java or C++? Okay, so to you guys, this is all going to be pretty basic stuff. You probably know it. I'm going to try to come at it from somebody who's looking at, I have an idea, maybe that's an entry point to this, or I already have an existing application, and now I want to try to extend its reach to mobile. I think that's a common pattern as well. There might be other patterns too to look at, but I think if we concentrate on those, then we can look at like a real engineering application, like this thing really has to do something. It's not just something where I'm pulling data from the back end. So there are a number of issues from the architecture standpoint in terms of what is it that I'm building out. Is it totally self-contained here, not even networked? I just download it, play non-network Angry Birds on my own, and that's the end of it. Or is it something like Foursquare where it knows where I am, where I'm going, presumably, allows me to check in with something meaningful like a voice clip or a video of where I am or a picture or whatnot. That stuff goes up to central somewhere where you would assume it's probably running on Elastic Cloud at Amazon or some other sort of big data scale infrastructure to handle that massive proliferation of this app. I think if you sort of start to think about who your customer is, who your target customer is, that will start to give you some idea about sizing in terms of what the reach is going to be and how many people you expect to have to service with this thing. And that drives really the design of the back end. If it's a trivial application, you don't have to worry about the back end. If it's not, you got to worry about scalability and parallelization and all those kinds of things, as well as what kind of level of service guarantee do you want to have. How important is it that my app is actually on all the time? If it's a health-related thing and it's monitoring something on me, I think I want a pretty highly reliable application that's not going to go south on me. I got to reboot my thing every other day. That's probably not good. Or if it's a navigation type thing, what are the error in, say, an iPad's GPS capability? How many do I need to get that error to minimize? There are all these other sorts of things in the environment that this thing has got to operate in that you have to take into consideration when you start to design it. So, given you now have an application, you have a sense of a use case, which is probably a good place to start, or a set of use cases, but something simple from the top down, or something describing how an end user would interact with this thing. Then that can start to dictate what kind of platform you want to use. And it also dovetails into your business model. Getting things in Apple's iStore and getting them onto the marketplace for Android, the revenue streams for those are different, how it's monetized is different, how you get them into those areas is different. There's no guarantee that you can put junk up into the iStore. Somebody's actually going to check that and look at that. So as a consumer, I have a sort of a guarantee that, well, if I download something from there, it's not going to totally trash my device, which would not be good. On the Android side, might be a little bit more risky, not sure. So those are the kinds of things you have to deal with from a perception side when you design this stuff. So again, is it a gain do I want to really service multiple platforms? It's an important question because, sure, I don't want to shut out all of the Android folks because that's the fastest growing segment right now. Sure, the iPhone side has domination, but those things will change. Maybe at some point they'll equal out. Did I make decisions early on in this to completely block myself out of reaching that other half of the market at some point? So that brings you to, well, is there a way that I can develop for both? So HTML5 starts to get talked about. Can you do with your app what you need to do on the device of choice with HTML5? Maybe you can, maybe you can't. Is it a game? How much network awareness do you need? How much memory are you going to need? How much local processing are you going to want to do here? If it's a medical app, for instance, it's cranking some heavy analytics based on some data you're gathering, or it's high-speed data gathering, or like your application is driving through places saying, okay, I'm about to hit a tunnel. I need to think about something smart to do with the fact that I'm going to lose GPS, I'm going to lose it for a while, I'm not sure when I'm going to get it back. So do I have to pre-cache stuff that I can look ahead for? These all have limitations. Yeah, they are, or the sensors, or you rely on other sensors that are in this suite. Because 20 years ago, this was a dream. I got to tell you, I mean, there's more capability in here than it would take a whole closet on a Navy ship, say, 25, 30 years ago to be able to deliver. And it's pretty darn good. So when you design these things, you have to sort of maximize the fact that you have all these tools at your disposal and deliver that seamlessly without letting the user know that there is that sophistication under it. They just do it. And that's the great advantage, I think, that the younger people have that are coming up. They don't have this baggage of, wow, we know how hard this engineering is. We know, and use that to sort of guide all your future development. They use that as baseline, then they're off. They're not thinking about that other stuff. They're thinking about, what can I do with this to make it really cool? So other issues and, questions, obviously, on the iOS side, you're going to deal with Xcode most likely, Objective-C, something like that. So some of it depends on what your skill is. Like, if Nick and I decide, hey, we got this really cool idea, in this day and age, we could probably prototype it in a few days if I don't sleep or something like that. I can code. Let's go do it. Yes, that will work. But at the end of the week, we have something that we can say, look, it's viable, it will work. We've checked the risk where we think the highest risk is, and Nick will pitch it. We'll be good to go. Then we go get real money to build out the infrastructure and whatnot. Sort of bound the problem that you're doing in the prototype stage so that you can actually, try something out. And the bar to entry for that is very, very low if you can code. If you can't code, you got to get somebody, you got to hire somebody or kidnap somebody or somebody that can bend metal for you. Sure.
Well, I know the primary focus here is on the mobile app side, but I find some of the decisions on the cloud side the harder ones to make in terms of what platform, because obviously, the phone itself, you're going to run on an iPad or iPhone, you're going to use iOS. If you're going to run an Android, you're going to use certain development kits and code and SDKs associated with that.
Right.
In the cloud, there really are, different providers, of course, Amazon Rackspace, Microsoft, and then really, I'm at the point where I'm trying to figure out, do I go Azure, because I'm very Microsoft-centric, or do I go with, which I'm very familiar with, founder of my company, or do I go the path of what the developers are recommending, which is, Python, Lithium, Java, and the cloud side, Ruby on Rails, if we can do that, that's, and so forth. All these programming languages and platforms that I'm not familiar with, but they feel highly confident with. I'm trying to winnow out, is their confidence due to their experience and say 9 of the K, because they have that's the window that they view. So these, I think, are some of the harder decisions to make than what you're going to do with the phone, because you're narrowly defined there. There are some cross-platform apps, like Phone Gap, that could take you across phones, but the cloud side, I think, is something I'd be interested more in hearing about and I'm confused by before we sort of pull the trigger and make that decision.
Sure, I think that'd be a great topic for another meeting, but I think what I run into is people of a certain, let's say, gray-hairedness, who are real programmers, started writing C when C came out. And that was a magical answer to having to do Fortran and some of that other stuff, especially for scientific programming or whatnot. But then C++ came out, and we all said, wow, this is the greatest thing, because it allows us to do much better memory management than C allowed you to do. And then the next generation of languages has come out, like Java does its own memory management, its own cleanup. So now I don't have to worry about smart pointers and all that kind of stuff. So I can take a team of 3 guys to write an app that it used to take me 9 guys to do, because I vastly simplified the coding. And I think that's what you're seeing with the next generation of tools like Python and some of these other things that you're talking about. Just the speed that you can prototype things and write like industrial strength applications is beyond what you could do with C++. Like unless it were mission critical in terms of performance and being able to address memory and all those kinds of things, I wouldn't plan on starting a C++ project, even if I knew it, because I know there are better ways that I can get to market quicker. And depending on the nature of the application, I think getting something out in front of people that they can look at and say, wow, that's really cool, that is much more important than, wow, I've really designed the best classes I've ever seen. They're optimal with respect to all these different criteria. No one cares. They want to see what's coming out of the other end of that screen. I don't know if that helps.
Well, it kind of does, but so I sat through a webinar today, and some people follow Microsoft and their product specialists' directions on Microsoft. They did sort of an hour webinar on the business SQL Azure. My understanding is that even on those platforms, you can run other, I don't know if you can run Lithium, Python, all those things, because those are maybe Unix specific. You can certainly run Ruby on Rails and other things, which confuse me, because now I'm thinking of these Unix concepts that's still on a Windows platform. So it's not as if it's even deeper than what you're saying in terms of, okay, fine, use those code bases, but on Windows or whatever. So I think it would be a fabulous topic to cover, because I think that's the harder. No, that's a good point to people are, you know,
I can't.
And the development in that is just so exponentially, it's an exponential development curve in terms of it's just constantly changing.
And the only thing I wanted to add to your point, if I may, is the back end stuff sometimes is obviously determined by the clients you need to support. Sorry to make an obvious point, but one of the things I wanted to kind of mention is in terms of what phone platforms from the client side. At this point, it's only 2 or 3 that really matter. I think it's iOS and Android, depending on your market, but I still think there's this choice that one makes, whether it's, the Microsoft guys are obviously pushing Windows Phone 7, or RIM, depending on your target market. And I've also been observing that Brew, on the client side for sort of simpler devices, because not everybody uses smartphones. 56 million of the 92 million Verizon users are actually on Brew devices. So that may drive some of the cloud decisions that you have to make, just to kind of toss that in the mix.
Question over there.
Yes, I have a question to bring us back to financing. I'm looking for seed funding for my company, which is a SaaS application. And you did a very good job of profiling SBIR. And I was wondering if you could maybe address notes, convertible notes versus equity and stock options for seed funding.
Sure. So the question is the different types of funding, different types. I mean, it goes back even to, and this is certainly something you need a lawyer for. So really
not an IP lawyer,
not a patent
lawyer, not a patent lawyer, but a lawyer, generalizing. There's also what kind of company you form. So how do you, when you incorporate, is it a C corp or is it an LLC? And as you bring in capital, there are certain requirements that you have in terms of what type of information rights you share with your investors, what kind of rights you give them to block you or prevent you as the founder or as the CEO from doing certain things, and issuing new shares, those sorts of things. So the key thing there is to really go down and sit down with a lawyer that is very familiar with capital structure of startup companies. My first stop is into, and there's plenty in town, and I'm happy to give you some ideas of ones that we've worked with that are very very knowledgeable in that area. As far as convertible note versus a priced round, which are sort of the two options, a lot of people are, companies we're seeing a lot are people doing, so the difference is that convertible note is actually a debt instrument, meaning that you don't actually own a piece of the company, you have a lien on the company. The company owes you that money, and the idea is that at a qualified funding or financing, you're going to convert that note into equity, and it's usually at a discount to the price that people are buying the normal shares at it. So if you're selling stock at $1, somebody who had a convertible note might pay 80 cents. Okay. And what, as a funding, so the conundrum as an investor is, if I give this guy a lot of money, and he builds, and right now he doesn't have much of a company, right? We'll agree among friends it's probably worth, $1 million. So if I give him a lot of money right now, if I give him $200,000, and he does a lot with it, and suddenly the company becomes worth $10 million, and I only get a 20% discount off of that, that means that I put money in where we think it was kind of worth $1 million, but now I'm paying an $8 million valuation because I'm a 20% discount off of that $10 million. That's a bad experience for an entrepreneur, an investor. It's a great experience for an entrepreneur. But at the same time, if I were to go price the round at $1 million right now, that actually costs a lot more money from a legal standpoint. And so what people are doing, and what we've done a number of times, is do a convertible note with a cap, which is, okay, we'll say the company's worth about $1 million. Let's cap it at 2. Let's say the company's worth, and the person says, well, it's definitely worth less than 2 right now. And so that way the cap kind of protects the investor, but also gives the entrepreneur some headroom to be able to grow the business in sort of a range of value. A lot of times you don't want to put value on a company in a convertible, you go to a convertible note to avoid putting value on a company if you're going to be raising venture capital soon after. Because if you go and raise money at a $2 million, $1 million valuation, it's hard 6 months later to say, so I'm worth $10 million now. So, so it's avoiding that pricing decision. So that's why, I think a lot of people go down those different paths, and happy to chat with you more. And, I think, most investors are familiar with those two different types of structure.
And just as a follow-on, I've run into some companies that structured the note poorly and pretty much made it impossible for VCs to come in the future. Can you talk a little bit about what kind of landmines we should avoid doing?
Yeah, I mean, it's very important to make sure that, that, for example, that the convertible note doesn't force the next investors to pay back those initial investors. So you want to make sure that it's conversion it's an automatic conversion, or a conversion not at the decision of the investor, but more at the decision of the company. So the company, so automatic conversion is the best because it just sort of happens automatically and there's no questions asked. What you don't want to have happen is basically have an early stage investor hold you ransom for getting their money back when the next real investor shows up, because the next real investor, the last thing they want to do is pay off an earlier investor. So that's the biggest pitfall I can think of. There's a lot of, there are other ones, I'm sure, but yeah.
There's a rule of thumb I've heard from some VCs: do not take convertibles more than $500,000. After that, it starts becoming too bulky, too complicated. I don't know whether that's still true, but I know, at least in the West Coast, convertibles are becoming very, very popular among entrepreneurs.
And convertible debt's also cheap from documenting from a lawyer versus an equity round.
Right.
And that's another consideration from a cash flow standpoint.
So the point around that, what Sanjay is saying is that if you have a large convertible note, you're actually inviting all those people who are in the convertible note to be participants in now what's called the A round. So they're all going to become preferred shareholders along with a venture firm. And the venture firm basically is saying, I don't want to have to go to these other people to make my decisions. So that's another sort of pitfall. I don't want to actually have to, every time we do a financing, I've got to get 40, signatures. So a lot of times what we would do is we would roll a group of earlier investors, if it's a messy situation, into a single class, have one person assigned to that class. And the way to do that really is that, no angel investor wants to be the last investor in a company. So the way to do that is you go to the angel investors and you say, look, you guys have got to cooperate. I know the terms are all written, all screwy, and you took advantage of this poor entrepreneur, but you got to fix this, because otherwise we're not going to be able to bring in the next capital, in which case your investment is going to die. So you show the option of debt, and then they start to become more reasonable. And then you say basically, okay, we're going to roll you up into a single class, we're going to put you in charge, you're going to sign, you're all going to agree, you're not going to sue anybody. Okay, now I can bring in the venture capital guy. So there's a cleanup. Possibly there's ways to clean it up, but there's a lot of companies, I've seen companies come to us and say, I've got 84 investors and the last round was at $90 million and they're doing $1 million in revenue. You're screwed at that point, basically. To go to convince all those people, because they've gone around and every year convince people that their company's now worth $45 million and $48 million and $50 million. And because they're building something that could, change the world, and it's a good story, but the capital structure is completely bogus, and no one believes it. So VC comes in and says, well, I think the company's worth about $5 million. So what do you tell the people who just bought it at 90? Not pretty.
Get a good business law firm.
Law firm.
Not somebody's uncle's friend's daughter's cousin's husband.
Yeah, no people, the guy who did the closing on your house.
So there's two questions. We're actually beginning to run out of time, so make them quick. And while you're beginning to think about wrapping up, what was popular first? Saturday Night Live or the C programming language? But then question back here.
Yeah, one question. We went through all the the notes in real life, all right, in terms of dealing with the investors and doing a convertible note. One problem I ran into, believe it or not, is because of the tax structure prior to December 31st, the note, no matter how you do it, even with the cap value line, it doesn't allow you to take possession of the shares. You understand what I'm saying? Until the conversion of the note. And right now, you're set up until December 31st. Have a potentially large investor back out, was that it's tax-free in terms of capital gains until January 1st. So he's like, I have better deals where I can take possession of the stock as an investment versus this note, which unless you can guarantee me a conversion, that I can take possession of the shares by December 31st, right? It's not a good investment. You understand what I'm telling you?
I'm not sure.
The note does not allow you to start the clock ticking on capital gains or possession of the shares.
Oh, I see. I do. Okay, I do understand.
There's another pitfall which I got screwed by. If the note has interest, particularly the high interest that they try to entice you into, you get screwed on phantom income, and it's real income that you have to pay tax on.
Right. So that's the other thing is you want to have all the income deferred into the conversion, because if you start to take income off of the note, first of all, the company shouldn't be paying out that income; it should be reinvesting that money.
I guess my question is,
But that's a different thing.
This is convertible stock, is what this is, basically. If people start to issue notes in convertible stock, which is a note that allows you to take possession of stock in a company after a cap value, which you mentioned, and then convert, so you always own the shares.
Yeah, just find a different investor. I mean, honestly, there's a lot of people out there who are really difficult about this stuff, and I've encountered these guys before. They're like, I want to know if I own 2% of this company, I want how many shares. I'm like, all right, forget it, just go do something else. I mean, it's just some people are just not worth it, and they don't spend too much time. All the figuring that out. It's so unconventional that you waste a lot of money on lawyers, basically. Not the lawyers.
They're distracting.
Well, I think a question here, and then we'll call that last question.
It's just hopefully a real simple, practical question. Whenever you talk to VCs, one of the very first questions they'll ask you is, who else have you talked to? and I heard conflicting advice on that.
Lie.
Perhaps, I can't answer it, but
I mean, you want to say, I mean, generally, rule of thumb.
You're the first.
That I approach, yeah, I mean, like, we always come to you first.
You're the only one for me.
I think, I think you want to sort of establish that you're in talking to peers at that firm. Certainly, you should not lie that you are, but because they'll check. But always hold a few that you're kind of far down the path with to yourself. And the reason is that you don't want the colluding of these VCs. It's good for them to know that a peer of theirs that they know and trust and respect met with you and is interested in having you come back, and that's a good thing. But if you've got 2 or 3 guys that you think are really progressing very positively, I keep that to myself and don't tell anyone about it, because there's a lot of it's not colluding, it's not illegal, but they just talk to each other.
But they also call it as a syndicate, so.
And you want to kind of create, so the whole thing that you're going, if you think about this whole process is for fundraising, is you're creating a market around your business in a certain point in time. So, the public market is always open 9 to 5, and you can buy stocks and sell stock. But in a private company world, there's no market until you create the market. And you create the market by identifying buyers of your shares. And so you need to create enthusiasm and PR around the business and create that market. And then you have to, hopefully within that audience of, more than 10 probably firms, but not 120, get enough critical mass of interest and then start to, not play them off each other as much as just make sure that you have a 2 or 3 healthy investors marching along a path. Because at some point at the end, you may have to push them off each other and say, look, these guys are going to do this, are you going to do this, these terms, or your terms are horrible, why,
Okay, last question, it'll be a good one.
Well, I guess I'm just trying to get a visual from really green here. I mean, this is the entry, the beginning of taking a really good idea and seeing where we need to go with it. What's expected when you're looking at talking to a VC? What are they looking for? What should you bring with you? What should you be prepared with when you're looking at literally entry level funding? How far along?
I'll try and take a quick cut because I
Yeah.
just did it earlier today.
Yeah.
PowerPoint deck that's dozen slides.
Okay.
That's straightforward. Doesn't have to be the prettiest thing, but who you are, what problem you're solving, why your stuff is better than anyone else's stuff.
Okay.
I'm changing the world, I'm disrupting, blah, blah, blah.
Okay.
You have to know what your costs are, know your numbers, because they're gonna say, what's your burn gonna be like?
Cost to a certain point, like cost to get to a deadline and a cost to get
To start your company, what's your payroll? What are your other costs? What's your rent? What, are you-
Okay, 4 quarters, that's what I mean.
Right.
Inside out. And there's a spreadsheet, every cell needs to be explainable.
Well, that's right.
Okay.
Have that spreadsheet in your briefcase,
Okay.
but, ideally, and I learned this painfully, actually, Nick was very good at giving me counsel, with telling this story. Here's my vision. I've got the best water in the world. Here's why it's the best water. Here's why I'm the best person, or why my team is the best team to bring this water to market. Here's how much money we're gonna make. Here's how much money we need. We know in about a year we're gonna need this much more, and this is what we're gonna do with it. So use proceeds. They can figure out how much money they're gonna make off of your idea.
Okay.
So you don't have to say, you're gonna make $100 million off of this, but I need this amount of money for this vision. Here's my patent protection, or here's, what I'm doing from an intellectual property standpoint. But it's a story, it's a discussion. And then you can hand somebody a sheet of papers and say, here's my deck. But it's an eye-to-eye conversation with somebody, I believe. And hopefully you can get them to say, I'm interested or I'm not interested.
Right.
And you want to hear no as quickly as you can, because you'll have people waste your time forever because they want to learn about the market, or they're going to raise a new fund next year in the marine technology world.
Of course.
And so you're
They're
sharing
going to
your.
school through you. Yeah.
That's exactly right. I mean, so I don't know if you disagree, but
The one thing I would add is accomplish something, right? So, a lot of people come to us all the time and they have an idea, or gonna do something, it's inexpensive enough these days to band together a bunch of developers, to get a bunch of business people interested, to, knock on some doors of potential customers, to pull together maybe some friends and family money, and actually accomplish something. And so if you walk into a venture firm, and this is a venture, you said specifically venture, so you better have actually accomplished something and built something that they can look and see and test and demo. It's not the same as it was 10, 15 years ago when you could come in with a great idea just because of who you were, you could get funding. People, they want to see your product. They want to understand how people are using it, and as much data as you can provide them about how quick adoption was, or how many people are using it, and how they use it. And this is where this company advertisement, Localytics, comes in, because they have all that data behind these apps, so they can supply that data back to you to help you articulate why your app is important, and why it's going to why it works at this small scale. And if we only had some money, we could go and promote it and make it a bigger, so we proved it out in our little test tube, kind of petri dish kind of world. And now we have enough data to be able to actually go and build a big business.
So with that, you can, it's the witching hour, so let's all thank the guest speakers. If somebody needs software development, come on down. And thank you all.